All right, it is Monday and we are commemorating Memorial Day here in the United States, a national holiday. But let's start you off in Gaza, where rescuers said devastating Israeli strikes in the Gaza Strip killed at least 52 people on Monday, 33 of them in a school turned shelter. The Civil Defense Agency says many of the casualties at the school in Gaza City were children, while the Israeli military said the site was housing key terrorists. Our next story takes a closer look at Gaza caught between bomb and famine.
Israel's bombardment has enveloped Gaza in a catastrophe. The world is watching in disbelief. Families are struggling to survive, caught between relentless airstrikes and an escalating war-induced hunger crisis. In Gaza, the line between sanctuary and slaughter has vanished. Israeli airstrikes targeted a school in northern Gaza that the Gaza Civil Defense says has killed over 24 displaced Palestinians, many of them women and children.
Last night we were sleeping. At 1 a.m., we were directly targeted without prior warning. Without warning, we were targeted. All those who were targeted were civilians. None of the martyrs were affiliated with any organization or military. Children, my nephew was martyred. He was 8 years old. Those who were martyred were children, and we were injured.
My wife, children, and I were sleeping upstairs, and we found everything falling on us, windows and stones. We ran out like crazy and found the school, as you can see, hit by 4 missiles last night.
Survivors recount a harrowing scene of families sleeping on classroom floors, being awakened by explosions that reduced their shelter to rubble. But beyond the bombings, famine looms large. An 11-week blockade has choked essential supplies, till Israel recently permitted limited aid into the besieged strip. The UN chief has called it a teaspoonful of aid, far short of the daily shipments that are needed. The desperation has led to chaos, with Palestinians running towards any truck they see, risking their lives for scraps of food.
We are exhausted. We are so tired that death would be more honorable. Life has become a tragedy. Dying would be more dignified. This is not a life. My children wake up wanting food. I can't sleep at night, thinking about how they will eat, how they will drink, how they will get through their day.
The head of a US-backed aid group for Gaza announced his resignation, saying it is impossible to do his job in line with principles of neutrality and independence. The Israeli military has announced plans to expand its ground offensive, aiming to control most of the Gaza Strip within 2 months. But for over 2 million people trapped inside, the future has never looked more uncertain. With each passing day, Israel forces Gaza civilians to make impossible choices between hunger, danger, and despair.
Joining me now on this broadcast is Jonathan Fowler, who is a spokesperson for UNRWA from Amman, Jordan. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us on WION. Given the severe food shortage and reports of widespread malnutrition, can you tell us about the situation on the ground currently as we speak? How much of the aid entering Gaza is actually reaching the most vulnerable, especially children and the elderly?
The situation is absolutely catastrophic. It's as catastrophic as it has been for many, many weeks. Yeah, so okay, there was a total siege on aid for 11 weeks, and then we saw a small amount of aid flow in, but a small amount. The point about that is vastly insufficient. We're talking about a few dozen trucks here and there, and yet, the needs to meet the basic survival needs of the population, 500 to 600 trucks a day. That's what has to flow in. It has to flow in an unfettered, unhindered manner, and that's just simply not happening. So the consequences, sadly, are completely obvious. Malnutrition continues to grow. Food is not being distributed. It can't be distributed to everybody that needs it. The quantity is insufficient, but it's also not reaching beyond the south of the Gaza Strip. This is completely unacceptable. It's inhumane, and it goes against all principles of international humanitarian law.
And what kind of operational barriers is UNRWA facing right now?
There are multiple barriers. Overall, the United Nations aid operation, the insufficient quantity, the need for permissions, the restrictions on what can be brought in, basically all that can be brought in currently is flour. And even then, it's not even a drop in the ocean. That would be too generous, to be quite honest. UNRWA has a specific issue. We're the largest humanitarian agency from the United Nations on the ground in the Gaza Strip. We have around 12,000 people. The rest of the United Nations system combined has, like a couple of hundred, 300-400 people maybe. Simply, it's impossible for international humanitarian aid to work effectively without UNRWA, and yet we're facing continued restrictions from the Israeli authorities on, our ability. We can't bring anything in. Other agencies have to bring in the humanitarian aid, but then we have restrictions on our ability to distribute. This is not an acceptable situation. The UN system needs to be able to function together, and it can't be kind of like a pick and mix imposed by one party to the conflict. That's one issue. Then, of course, the fact that we have such a large number of staff also means tragically that our staff's lives are on the line in huge numbers. We've had more than 300 of our staff killed in the Gaza Strip since the start of this war. That is an unprecedented figure in the history of the United Nations. Staff members killed with their entire families, picking their relatives out from the rubble of buildings, all of these things, and yet they continue to operate. Now, I want to emphasize that there are things we are continuing to do, despite the fact that we're severely restricted. We have around 19,000 medical consultations every day. We're gradually running out of medicine, but our medical staff are continuing to operate. Our sanitation staff are trying to clean garbage, clean water, to actually give some element of dignity to the population. And we have around 100,000 people living in our schools and other facilities, which were transformed into emergency shelters at the beginning of the war. But we're doing what we can, but it's still not enough. And really, we need an immediate ceasefire. We need aid to be able to flow in, and we need to be able to do our job.
And in light of the ongoing risk of a famine on the one hand and the limited humanitarian access that you talk about on the other, you're mentioning that UNRWA has been, to a certain extent, able to carry out some of its operations. What urgent steps would you like to see from the international community, Israel as well? And also, there have been reports of looting by members of Hamas. Can you touch on that? Are there problems regarding that inside of Gaza when it comes to distributing this humanitarian aid, and what should be done?
Look, the issue of looting has arisen at multiple occasions during this war. I want to emphasize that during the ceasefire, it almost completely disappeared. Now, why is that? That's because, when you restrict aid from coming in, and then a small amount of aid is allowed in, by definition, that aid becomes an incredibly valuable commodity. We're hearing statistics like, a truck carrying enough flour, say, for 800 families. The value of that flour on the market is, something several $100,000. So, I mean, that's the kind of thing. So it's inevitable that there is an element of criminality related to looting. But really what we're looking at here is, a complete breakdown of law and order. It might sound like a paradox to talk about law and order in a situation like this, but, desperation has driven members of the community to desperate measures. There's been an element of criminality, people taking advantage of the situation. But the point is, really the immense restrictions now and the tiny amount of aid flowing in. I mean, this just encourages a kind of survival of the fittest approach because, it's the stronger people who are able to get to the aid, whoever they may be. What happens to the amputees? What happens to the orphans? The elderly, all the people who are less able to receive aid to actually get to it, they're not getting it. So what needs to happen to respond to that part of your question? Well, there has to be advocacy for a change, and the change has to happen immediately. The change has to be that aid needs to be able to flow into the Gaza Strip unhindered. That's the bottom line. I mean, there's no other question. That has to happen. It's about saving the lives of a population which is, teetering on the brink, basically, of something much, much worse.
I think devastating is an understatement. I don't even know what to say. I really appreciate your comments, your analysis, helping us be our eyes and ears on the ground and trying to get a better understanding of what's happening in Gaza. We're going to be following this story very closely. Jonathan Fowler, I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.